Good afternoon. I'm recording this week's reflection in Tennessee, where I'm visiting my dad and my mom, who's now in hospice care. These are a couple of her oil paintings behind me. It's been great to see my folks and my brother and his family who also live here, as well as an aunt and uncle who were visiting from Minnesota. We're getting a really good rain right now, so you might hear some of that in the background. This week in our One Year Chronological Bible readings, we spent most of our time reading the prophet Isaiah. It's one of the longest books in the Bible, 66 chapters. I introduced Isaiah briefly when we read a few excerpts a couple of weeks ago. It's divided into two scrolls. Chapters 1 through 39 are kind of known as the Book of Judgment because they deal with the situation in Isaiah's day. The rise of the Assyrian Empire and the impending destruction of Jerusalem, and their later exile to Babylon, the next superpower that rose. It was a message of, so Isaiah had this message of judgment and hope for Jerusalem, and also judgment and hope for the nations. This past week we heard the story of good King Hezekiah in Jerusalem. Both from readings in Kings and Chronicles, as well as in Isaiah. He prayed to God for deliverance from the Assyrian army, which had surrounded Jerusalem, and God answered him and delivered them overnight. But a little later, Hezekiah made an alliance with the new superpower Babylon and showed their envoys all of the splendor of his palace and the temple. Isaiah warned Hezekiah that Babylon would turn on them, destroy Jerusalem and the temple, and carry them all away into exile. The people's idolatry and trust in their military alliances led to their downfall. However, God promised that the exile would not be their end. Chapter 40 begins the second book of Isaiah with beautiful words of hope. "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling, in the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young." Handel's Messiah took those words and shows their connection to Jesus. But Israel, instead of repenting and bearing witness to all the nations, started complaining and accusing God. The Lord doesn't pay attention to our trouble. He ignores our cause. The Babylonian exile had caused Israel to lose faith in their God. They started to think that maybe he wasn't all that powerful. Maybe the gods of Babylon were greater. Chapters 41 through 47 in Isaiah are set up like a trial scene as God responded to their doubts and accusations. First of all, the exile into Babylon wasn't divine neglect, but divinely orchestrated judgment for Israel's sin. Secondly, God would raise up Persia to defeat Babylon, to conquer them and fulfill Isaiah's prophetic word of deliverance. The right conclusion was to draw that their God is the king of history, not their idols. In the fall of Babylon and the rise of the Persian king Cyrus, Israel was to see God's hand at work and become his servant who would bear witness to the other nations. God promised to destroy the power of Babylon by using Cyrus the Persian to defeat them and to bring his people home, which happened in 538 BC. And then it pointed beyond as well. But you, Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I have chosen, you descendants of Abraham, my friend, I took you from the ends of the earth, from its farthest corners I called you. I said, you are my servant. I have chosen you and have not rejected you. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. I will keep you and will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles, to open eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. However, at the end of the trial, in chapter 48, Israel was still just as rebellious and hard-hearted as their ancestors. They disqualified themselves from being God's servant to the nations. But God still had a mission to bless all the nations. So the prophet said that God would do a new thing to solve the problem. God would send his servant to fulfill his mission to restore Israel and to make them to be a light to the nations. It is too small a thing for you to be my servant to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. The servant would be rejected and killed as a sacrifice for sin, but then would live again and make many right with God. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. As Christians, we see all of these prophecies coming true in Jesus. The book of Isaiah comes to an end with a grand vision of the fulfillment of all of God's covenant promises. Through the suffering servant king, God creates a covenant family with all nations who are awaiting the hope of a renewed creation and the coming of God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. How will you respond to these words of hope and restoration? Will you reject and resist him, or humbly repent and join in God's mission? Check out the Bible Project's guide and video on the second part of Isaiah. That'll be linked in the description of this video to hear and see more. Hope to see you in worship this Sunday at 8:30 or 10:15. Have a great end of the week.